Hey, folks, how's it going? This is Francisco again. So, just a full disclaimer, I did change a little bit on the environment. I went back to my Linux machine because I just wasn't having it with Windows. It was just too clunky for me. So, nothing has changed. The code base is the same. The only thing that has changed is just the way that it looks in the theme. There might be a couple things with the command line that are different since I'm using Bash, but it should kind of pertain very close to the people that are using the Mac OS and any other Linux environment, essentially. Okay, so let's get started. Let's continue. So where we left off is we set up our application and we got it running. So let's go ahead and just start run just to verify. And while I was off screen, I did add the start and the reset. And I can't remember which one it was. I think it was the reset that we added, but we'll go ahead and start right here. I'll go ahead and put a placeholder because I was working some bugs, and so we should have this if you're. So you should have this if your code, if you followed along with the CSS rules that we used with Bootstrap. So you should have that. Let me go back to this. Kind of the cool things that you can do with Linux. All right, so if it doesn't look like that, then go ahead and go back to the previous videos and make sure that you copied everything accordingly. And you should not have all three. Just make sure, if you don't have all three of these buttons, just go ahead and follow this three buttons. So we have the start, reset, and pause, and they all are the same with the exception of the variants. So it shouldn't be too different. So let's go ahead and continue. Let's work on our logic here. So since we are using a React function, you'll have to put all of your logic inside of the function. And since we're not using a class, we'll have to use useEffect and useState. Like I previously said before, with the cool thing with React is that you can manage your states using these hooks. And that's one of the functions that React has, is that you can kind of store your I would say variables in the state, which is kind of a unique way that React stores data, and it just kind of passes it through its components. I don't want to get too technical into it. I just kind of want to show you guys how it works. So let's go ahead and start. All right, so I'm going to pull up some of our states. So we'll go ahead and set up our states first. So the way that we're working with this is that we want to make sure that we have, we can keep track of our minutes and seconds. So there's going to be some really funky logic to keep track of that, and we're going to use JavaScript set interval to kind of keep track of those ticks. And computers can take track of like seconds, milliseconds. So most of this stuff is going to be done in milliseconds. We'll just kind of have to set our milliseconds to seconds and then start doing our time conversions. It's nothing too complicated, but we'll have to kind of keep in mind how we want to handle these. So there'll be a separate state for the minutes, a separate state for the seconds, and we'll have to keep track of, hey, is it running or not? So we'll just kind of start with the basics of the timer here. And of course, we'll kind of tie it into the buttons here as well. So let's go ahead and start with our state. So the way that you declare a state is you have a constant and it's an array, and then you'll do use state. And you'll have to import it from React, and you'll kind of put it in your parentheses here so you can make sure that you're selecting the use state that you're going to want to import. And we'll name this state is running. And the second function is set is running. Cool. And since it's a function, you want to have your default. And the way that we're going to start our application is with false. That way we know that it's not running and you have to manually start it. So we'll use set is running to make sure that we change this over to false. All right, so our second one is going to be is. So we'll put this one time and minutes, and we'll do set time min, and of course we'll use state, and this is going to be a number, and we'll set it to 25. Cool. All right, so now we'll set another one, and can you guess which one this one's going to be? It's a pretty simple one here, actually. It is time and seconds. Set time in seconds. All right. And we'll go ahead and use another state for this one, and we'll set it at 0. Now, how are we going to display our time over here? So if you want to select your attributes that you have here, we'll just kind of set this over to time and minutes. And that's how we're going to render this data object here. And you got to make sure it's a string or number, or if you have like some weird object, it won't render. But let's go ahead and pop this up. Okay, cool. So it's all the same. And if we want to keep this on the side here, and I'll just kind of narrow this one down here so we can see in real time. So let's just kind of focus on the app here. All right, let me just kind of shorten this one a little bit more so you can see better. I kind of want to show you the live view. Okay, so now we're going to replace our seconds, and a lot of people that are experienced with this are going to notice what the issue that we're going to run into here. The issue that we have. So let's go ahead and double check here. As you can see, that 0 is just one digit. And for most people that are used to timers, you want to have 2 zeros. And we're going to have to put some logic in here. And this is rendered JSX in here. So we talked about it previously, but we didn't really go in depth. So this is all JavaScript. We just kind of have some fancy differentiation where we can tell like, hey, this is a div, and I want to render a div in my document, and the class name, we're going to insert a class of yada, yada, yada. Okay, so you can actually put in functions here, and you can treat it as a JavaScript. So the way that we don't really need to change anything with the minutes, but we do need to change the seconds. So in order to do that, we can put in logic here. So if times seconds is less than 10, and we'll use our ternary operator here. So this is logic, and this is our if, shorthand if. Then add 0. All right. Plus, not add 0. So we'll have the 0 first, and then times second. All right, cool. Now, if it's not, then we just have times second. Now let me just kind of go over it one more time. So if this is a logic here, if time second is less than 10, then we're going to start with a 0, and we're going to add times second again, the string. And if you were watching one of the previous JavaScript logic videos that I presented, there's a cool thing that happens with JavaScript when you add a string and a number. It's just going to concatenate two strings. And if you need a refresher on that, I would suggest going back to my previous video and just watching that so you can kind of understand what's going on. And then this is a if true. This is what happens if it's true. And then when we go with the colon, we're just going to render the seconds, because at that point we're past 10 and we don't need to render the 0 anymore. So we can just kind of let it be. It'll be like 11. And so, all right, cool. Or 10. All right, cool. So let's go ahead and save this, and you'll see that the logic is going to update this. And it's going to be kind of clunky and slow because this Linux machine is not the fastest computer in the West. All right, so we have all this set up. All right, now let's continue with our functions. So in order for this to start, we're going to have to use effect. All right, so we have use effect, and there's use effect kind of is, if you've used Vue before or any other of these frameworks, is before you mount your document or whatever you want to call it, you can execute functions. So essentially that's what's going on with use effect. It's kind of like a state management tool or a lifecycle management tool of your component. So as soon as it's rendered, it'll kind of shoot and fire. So as you can see, we have an anonymous function here. So we're just kind of running this function as soon as our component's rendered. And then we have if it's running, we're going to execute this code. And then, why did I do that? I got to stop doing that. All right. And then right here, you always want to add your array. And as you can see, it's got a cool documentation here that you can review. If present, effect will only activate if the values in the list change. So this is kind of like what you're watching change. And I've never actually read this, and read this and gone into in depth exactly why you need this, besides that you will render an infinite loop if you don't have this. But this is very important for the type of work that we want to do, because we want to keep track of the changes in state whenever it's running, the time in minutes and the time in seconds. So since we want to keep track of that, we'll go ahead and add it's running, time in minutes, and time in seconds. So I'll keep track of these states, and it'll essentially kind of re-render, well, not re-render, but re-render the states that it needs. So we'll keep track of these. All right, cool. So let's go back into our if statement if it's running. So if it's running, we have some logic. So first we want to decrease in seconds, because that's our primary action that's going to happen. And we also want to make sure to decrease minutes. And decreasing minutes is not going to happen that often, right? It's going to be every minute compared to every second. So we'll follow that. And then we'll want to keep track of the state to make sure that if it's running. So check if time ends. So that will be when the minutes are 0 and the time and the seconds are 0 as well. Sorry, cool. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to start a function, and we'll start a constant, and we'll call this interval, and then we'll call it interval pom. And then we'll do the set interval function. And we'll just kind of run this function. And this is essentially, this is an interval. So if you can see right here, the way that it's function is we have our set interval function here, and we have a callback, which we're going to run. So, and then over here, after your callback, you're going to want to put down your milliseconds at your every millisecond to run this callback function. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and just state our milliseconds. So it's 1000 milliseconds is a second. So that's how often we're going to want to run this callback. And within this is where we have our function or if statements that we're going to put down here. Cool. So decrease seconds. So if, and I'm going to indent this just so we can kind of have like a neat, and I definitely did something here that is not right. Set interval. Okay. Okay, this is what happened. So if time seconds is greater than 0, we'll set our time in seconds to time in seconds. We'll set that, and I'm going to use a pointer function to pretty much update the duration. So it'll be time in seconds. So we're going to reference that again, -1. Okay, cool. Now we're going to decrease the minutes. So what's our if statement here if we're going to decrease the minutes? So we'll do our time in minutes, and then, oh, yeah, actually, no. We'll want to keep our time in seconds. And if it equals to 0, because at that point, oh, we reached 0. Now we gotta set back, knock down our minutes. So we're gonna set our time in minutes, and same logic that we applied for the seconds, we're just gonna do it for our minutes here. And we'll do the arrow function, and then we'll do time minutes -1. And we'll just kind of knock down that time. And then we'll go over here and set our duration. Set our time in seconds. And we're going to want to switch that over to 59 to signify that, hey, we've lost that minute. Now we're going to put down our second timer again. So we'll set that back to 59. Okay. Man, this Linton is taking so long. All right. Cool. And under the use effect, we're going to want to clear the interval. So as soon as we once we get out of this interval, we're going to go ahead and clear the interval. So we'll use clear interval, and we'll clear this interval that we created here. So we'll put in the constant. We'll save that. Cool. Now we got to check if time ends. And I know I kind of went out of order, but we'll just kind of finish this with another if statement here. And there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. It's just kind of the way that I came up with. And it's a lot easier than managing time through the time, well, at least for me, through the date time functions. All right, so we'll put time if time minutes equals 0. And then we'll do and, because we need this also. We need these two specific logic statements in it because we want to check for when both of these are true. So both time in minutes and time in seconds have to be 0 at the same time. And again, I have a JavaScript course that is very scatterbrained, but it does explain how to use these logic operators. So if you're kind of lost here, which is like the very basic, make sure you double check and make sure that you go back and learn the information. Otherwise, you won't be able to do this on your own and follow through with the course because you might run into a bug and you'll see like, well, why isn't this working? Well, your logic operators are wrong. So anyways, so at this point, we'll want to change it to set is running. What did I do here? To false. And actually, you know what? I'm going to leave this here because I am going to add some functions. So, you know what? Just to do that, we'll just kind of run it to false. And then it'll stop right here if that's the case. All right, cool. So that's cool and everything. So we got it hooked up. Nothing blew up here. The problem is that by default, this is firing up if it's running, and we have our state set to false. So we want to attach the running state to set it to run from start. So we have our start button here, and there's a thing called onClick. So we'll just kind of continue down here, and we'll run component functions. So we'll start creating our component functions here. And we'll define a function. And I'll call this one, nope, I don't want it to be start timer. And we'll use an arrow function. And we'll do set is running. And we'll set it to true. Now, what I'm going to do is we'll do the onClick. And we'll go ahead and put start timer here. Oh, and I did not do it the right way. It should be the curly braces here. Cool. Click start timer. So whenever we start, if we have this set up right, it should cycle through the use effect because it's running, and it should check if it's start running the intervals. And then once everything's said and done, it'll return and it'll clear the interval. So cool. And then of course, we'll keep track of if it's running, we'll keep track of the time in minutes, and we'll re-render the page, well, the components that are needed accordingly. So it'll only re-render these state objects, which is our Boolean and our numbers on minutes and seconds. Cool. So let's go ahead and start. Cool. And we can see that it's working. Great. So that's great. The only problem is that we can't pause and we can't reset. So I want to show you the magic of React State Management and how it's going to keep track of the state no matter what we do to our development environment. So let's do a mad science experiment. And I think we'll probably pause for here and kind of chop this into another piece. So go ahead and get some lunch, grab something to eat, bite into an apple or something, or take a running break or something. I'll see you guys in the next video. Okay, I hope everybody had a decent break and was able to go back on the code and review everything, get some water or whatever you needed to do during the break. Now welcome back. So we did half of the logic to complete the Pomodoro timer. Essentially, we got it to run and it's firing up and it's running. The problem is that we can't do anything to pause it or reset the timer. So that's not good. So let's go ahead and finish it up. So we want to add more functions here, more component functions, and we'll call this one pause. Oh, pause timer. And to pause the timer, we'll want to put set is running, and we'll go ahead and set it to false. And this should essentially pause the timer. All right, so let's go add another onClick, and then go ahead and, man, my syntax finishing is not working today, which really sucks. And I'll save it. And the cool thing is that you'll see that the React app actually refreshes, but the virtual DOM is still running in the same state that it was before. As you can see, we are keeping track of the state. The cool thing is that we can actually pause it. Oh, I actually put in the wrong one. It should be paused, not reset. So let's go ahead and set out of this and add it to pause. All right, so we'll go ahead and hit the pause button, and the timer stopped, which is really cool. So what would happen if we were to start again? If we were to hit the start button again? Well, the use state will change to running back to true, and then we'll create another interval, and then we'll just kind of continue on with this, which is pretty cool. And actually, this is a really weird one. I'm not sure how it was keeping track of the minutes here, because we should have this one to time in minutes, which is weird. Really, really weird. Okay, that should have thrown a bug, but it didn't actually. Well, whoever finds out what actually happened there is a genius, or just really cares about it. So let's go ahead and start. Now, if we start it, we should kind of continue our countdown where we left it. Cool. So that's the beauty of using React states, React state management, is that we can continue to work on this, and this will keep track of the state. And no matter what you do with your page, you'll be able to maintain that data. So whether it's forms or anything else that you need to keep track on the web browser, React application will be able to keep track of that while you're still working on the application and navigating through different portions of your application. And this is why it's really useful for single page applications. So now we got to finish our functions by adding the reset. So we'll do reset timer, and we'll go ahead and do another. We'll do another pointing function, and we'll want to essentially set is running to false, and we'll also want to set time in minutes back to the default of 25, and set is set time in seconds to 0. Cool. And we'll go ahead and put it on the on click. And reset timer. I'll save this. And if I reset the timer, essentially what's going to happen? So we're going to stop the timer from running because we're going to clear our interval, and this will no longer be running. And it'll return to state, and as you'll see that it's not running, you won't see it count down anymore. And what happens after that? Well, we're going to set our time in minutes back to 25 and our time in seconds to 0. So let's go ahead and reset it. Awesome. Great. That works beautiful. And if we start, you can see that we're counting down, which is great. All right. So what happens if we pause? It stops. And let's double check and make sure we do our thorough unit testing and make sure that since we added the reset timer and added our on click pointer to the function, let's make sure that we can continue to start our timer. Well, that's great. Now, there's a lot of cool applications online that will do the traditional timer click. And once you reach your time when you're done with your Pomodoro interval, it'll make some noise. And that's where we're going to introduce Howler.js. Now, what Howler.js is going to do is it's going to allow us to play that noise back through the web page using JavaScript, and it simplifies us having to mess with the audio files, and it does it in a really nice package where we can just interact with those APIs and abstracts that for us. Now, one of the things that we haven't taken into consideration is how many intervals we are doing. So we're going to go ahead and continue to work on this application and continue to keep track of how many times we've completed an interval and also how many times we've taken breaks. Because once this is done, there's no timer, there's no tracking for whenever we're going to take a 5-minute break. So we got to add another state for our break time. All right, so I hope that your application's running, and for homework, I would make sure that once you get to when it's 0 minutes and 0 seconds, that it actually stops. Now it should. If it doesn't, then you're going to have to go back and make sure that your use state is set up correctly. All right. So I hope you guys are able to validate that your timer stops when the time runs out. And we'll follow along to add the other functionalities of the Pomodoro timer and add some fun noise. Who knows? Maybe we could add some really quirky sounds. See you on the next one.